Welcome back to RotoBaller Starts and Sits. I'm Matt Donnelly, and after 1 week of the NFL season, we find ourselves with more questions than answers. Perhaps the most prominent issue fantasy managers are coming to grips with this week is the poor passing performance across the board, where wide receivers were more like wide deceivers. Get it? Now, heading into Monday Night Football, the 33 passing touchdowns were the lowest such total we've seen to start an NFL season. Basically telling the 2023 season, hold our beer. They had 37 passing touchdowns that season. So, hey, if that wasn't enough, the total yards per contest and average passing yards per team were amongst the lowest dating back to 2003. With that all being said, it's time to make our best defensive back impression there and display a little bit of that short-term memory and move on from week number 1 and head into week number 2 with the starts and sits at the wide receiver position. Week 1 starts include Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions as they take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jared Goff only targeted 2 of his receivers in that Lions home opener. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he had a 21% target share. Meanwhile, Jameson Williams, he earned a 32% target share against the Rams. Williams made the most of his opportunities by turning those 9 targets into 121 yards and a touchdown while making Tre'Davious White wish he was still in Buffalo. Williams, he's going to continue his breakout campaign this week with a visit from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Zion McCollum, he's going to have his hands full with Williams this week. After all, McCollum, he did leave last week's contest with a concussion. If McCollum can't go, the Bucs are down to basically the third string corner in Tyreek Vanderberg, or whatever you want to call his name is. Brace Hall, he suffered a dislocated right ankle and a fractured tibia in that win against the Commanders. Williams versus the third stringer is a matchup that Goff and the Lions are going to be eager to exploit time and time again. Another start this week is Michael Pittman Jr. at the Indianapolis Colts as they take on the Green Bay Packers. Michael Pittman Jr. may have only registered 31 receiving yards last week from his 4 receptions, but he did have 8 of Anthony Richardson's 19 passing attempts, giving way to the whole thought process. There's some optimism here with Pittman Jr. Those targets, they wound up being a 42% target share, so we know that when this Colts team is going to pass, there's a good chance it's going to go to Michael Pittman. Now, if Pittman continues to see that target share of greater than, say, 30%, you must keep rolling him out there for fantasy. At some point, those deep shots that Richardson's taking with Alec Pierce and Ashton Dulin can hopefully continue to open things up for the Colts receiver. And all signs point that that's going to happen this week. Against the Packers, A.J. Brown, he finished with 22 fantasy points thanks to a touchdown grab and 119 receiving yards. Brown managed to see 10 targets in that contest, which worked out to a 35% target share. Pittman, expect him to be in for a similar line of production as he looks to bounce back against Green Bay this week. And finally, if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. I'm going back to Malik Neighbors this week as the Giants take on the Washington Commanders. Now, I rarely use a player twice, let alone back-to-back consecutive weeks, but hey, I'm going to make an exception for a player when they're taking on the Washington Commanders. In Neighbors' NFL debut, he was targeted on 7 occasions, hauling in 6 of those targets for 66 yards and an average of 13.3 yards per reception. Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson look to be the only viable options that this Giants offense actually has. How was Neighbors a start, do you ask? How about the fact that he finished with an 18.4% target share after seeing nearly 50% of the targets in the first half, which means he's going to be a primary option again this week against the Commanders secondary that allowed Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to each hit the pay dirt there last week. Again, the Commanders allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers last season. Even if Neighbors doesn't know what the heck is going on back there, he's going to get his one way or the other. We all have been done dirty at some point in fantasy. It's what happens, but hey, I thought the dirty bird was behind us now. I am sitting Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons as they take on the Philadelphia Eagles. Just when you thought things could not get any worse for Drake London after dealing with Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota in seasons past, Kirk Cousins looks like a shell of his former self. Cousins, he couldn't even compete in a one-legged butt-kicking contest, let alone an NFL game, as he continues to recover from that Achilles tear. Drake, he has the talent, but watching Cousins operate under center, you can see that he is struggling to plant that back right foot and drive the ball. There will come a point when Cousins is somewhat back to normal, but until then you can't start London. You can't trust him, even in this great matchup here against the Eagles. I don't see the Falcons making a quarterback change, so you're going to have to remain patient here when it comes to Drake London. Suppose you're looking for some silver lining. There are better days ahead. TJ Watt, he's an absolute game wrecker there. We know Joey Porter is one of the elite shutdown corners in the game today. Better matchups, they are coming. Now, one piece lost in all this is the fact that both London and Kyle Pitts each had a 100% participation rate. That is far from the old Arthur Smith days. So, hey, better days, they are coming. Another wide receiver who had a bad week number 1, who I'm fading here again in week number 2, is Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars as they take on the Cleveland Browns. Sometimes it's just simpler to follow the numbers and not overthink things. We can make fantasy football way too complicated at times. On one hand, you have Christian Kirk, who, like many receivers from fantasy last week, was a disappointment. He caught 1 of 4 targets for 30 yards in that season opener. Trevor Lawrence, he struggled in general there as well, completing just 12 of 21 attempts for 162 yards. And now, this week, the Jaguar duo, they roll into Cleveland there to face this Browns defensive unit that just held Dak Prescott to 179 yards and CeeDee Lamb to 5 receptions and 61 yards. Last week, I talked about fading CeeDee Lamb, and I caught a lot of grief from that here in the comments section here due to how good this Browns defense is. So you know I'm going to fade Christian Kirk here as well. It's one of the few defenses here in the league where the back end matches the front end. And Dallas's passing game, it struggled against this defensive front for the Cleveland Browns. So I'm expecting the Jaguars to, guess what, struggle against the Cleveland Browns team that just allowed 25.36 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers last season. And they started 2024 just where they left off in 2023, which means you need to leave Christian Kirk on the bench. And finally, Jaden Reed and Christian Watson, and basically any wide receiver that the Green Bay Packers can roll out there against the Indianapolis Colts this week. Now, I could probably have made this the shortest write-up, the shortest video of all time by simply saying Malik Willis. But however, I do kind of have a word target or a time kind of area in which I need to meet each and every week in these starts and sits conversation. With Jordan Love's injury, every player on this Packers offense is going to take a fantasy hit over the next 2 to 6 weeks as Love continues to recover from that MCL sprain, which he suffered in that week 1 loss to the Eagles. With Love, Jaden Reed and Christian Watson, they could have played their whole role of Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins last week, with the pair getting like 2 touchdowns here and 100 receiving yards there. But instead, we're looking at this team against a Colts secondary with Malik Willis. They're kind of like Jay and Silent Bob, and that's not good for fantasy. Hey, great for TV, not so much for fantasy football. Now, of the two, Reed, he may be the more playable option here, as the Packers could add a few more jet sweeps to the playbook here to get the ball into their playmakers' hands and hope for a repeat of one of his 2 touchdowns from last week down in Brazil. As for Watson, I have no faith in him whatsoever with Malik Willis running this passing game for the Packers. Watson, he missed some big-time opportunities there last week down in Brazil against this Eagles team. The fantasy points, they were there. He just couldn't capitalize, and he's certainly going to miss what Jordan Love brings to the table. Back in 2022, Malik Willis, he completed 31 of 61 passes for just 276 yards over 5 contests. If Green Bay wants to stay competitive, while Love is absent from the team, Willis is going to have to get things done with his legs rather than his arm, and I don't know if that's going to happen, and it certainly doesn't help these pass catchers for the Packers. But what's going to help you is heading over to RotoBaller.com for all the latest news and notes coming around the league here for fantasy, and hey, just so you keep in the loop here for all things. And of course, head to the Discord channel for all your starts and sits questions, because you know what? You'll find me there. See you next time.